Welcome, everyone. Another episode of Financial 15. Lots of great information today. We're looking at the emotional phases of retirement. We've talked about retirement a number of times from different angles, largely financial. This is looking at the other aspect. How do you adjust to retirement, the emotional phases you go through? Lots of good information. You want to stick around.
Yeah, when it comes to retirement, most people only think of the financial factors, but there's actually more involved in that. We're going to get into that today. So again, if you want to find out what we've had on our financial videos in the past, whether it's retirement or anything else, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Lots of great information there. You can click down below and that'll be the perfect place to go. Otherwise, please like us on Facebook, or you can always visit our website at beckerorr.com. We have plenty of great information on there. Plenty of videos, everything else that you need to go. But today we are dealing with the emotional side of retirement. We've dealt with the financial many times, but most people don't realize that there are emotional aspects, aren't there, Clint? How do we start this off? 5 phases. Where do we go from here?
Absolutely. We did a video a little while back about the transitioning to retirement, a few things to help with the transition. Part of that was touching on this model, and we just briefly touched on it, but we're going to go through it in more detail today. And the top portion of the slide is from Robert C. Atchley, who's a sociologist in the U.S. in the 70s and 80s. He came up with this model of adjustment to retirement. You can see all the different phases that are listed there. Now, his opinion was more about people finding a new role in life in retirement. It's an adjustment model. So as people make adjustments to their life, they go through these different phases. He had 6. Termination phase. I'm not sure if that one needs to be included.
Exactly.
But I think we have an idea of what that is. We can focus on the 5. REITs and Mutron, that's where we'll be spending the bulk of our time today. They actually did a study. There's in North Carolina. They followed people around for the first 2 years of retirement. They collected the data, and they found their data actually lined up pretty well with Atchley's model. So they have some data to back up. This is, in fact, the process people tend to go through when they adjust to retirement. Some of the details there, their model only had 5 stages. They dropped out that pre-planning stage. So that's what we're going to cover today, going through that model and going through the data and providing a couple of tips of how people generally make adjustments as they transition into retirement. You on the same page, Kevin?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the biggest factor. I don't think a lot of people realize that there's the emotional phases that are going through, and the 6 that they have there, or the 5, depending on where the study's done and whether or not we're including termination on that point. But yeah, I mean, these are all things that you have to look at, and whether you realize it or not, you are going to go through these phases. It's almost unconceivable that everybody who hits retirement doesn't have that sort of an aspect. And we usually start, beforehand and move our way through as we get into there. So there's that sort of pre-retirement scenario, but that's sort of the areas that we want to concentrate on first, isn't it? Sort of retirement pre-planning, which is, you get into your late 50s or 60s or whatever the case may be. That's when you really, it sort of hits home that, you don't have that many years left to work. And now what am I going to do? Have I planned properly? And that's sort of an emotional state right there. Well, what do I have to do? Do I want to scramble and do it at the end, or do I want to get everything dealt beforehand so I have a little more comfort going in? This is really something that it is an emotional task besides just a financial one, isn't it?
It is. And this is where the bulk of people spend their time. There's lots of videos, lots of content on this, on the planning for retirement, like getting ready for retirement. And this was part of Atchley's model, but that study by REITs and Mutron that we're going to go through, they actually dropped this out. That's why they only have 5 stages and not 6, because they didn't consider this particular item. But we wanted to mention it because this is where the people spend the bulk of their time. So we'll get into the actual study here. We'll show you some of the details, and I'll summarize it with a nice chart. This was data from their study. They went through 4 kind of measurement periods trying to get people's attitudes towards retirement. The pre-retirement phase, 6 months in, 12 months in, 24 months in, and you can see it changes. And I created the chart here, but it's from data from their study. You can see initially increases for men and for women. Then you can see it kind of plummets. It drops rather significantly in that kind of 1-year mark, and then slowly turns, and you end up with a recovery around the 2-year mark, although the recovery is not quite where you had that euphoric high at the 6-month stretch. So you can see there's a bit of a roller coaster there as people adjust to retirement. Does this make sense to you, Kevin? This is what you thought?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, as I say, even though they don't include pre-retirement in their strategy of 5 phases, they do show that it's there. And of course, that's the
Yeah.
biggest factor. I mean, how many people we've run into where there's that, okay, I've only got a month left to work, or I'm in my last year and I'm going to be retiring. There's that euphoria, that excitement that says, look, I'm going to go. That leads you to that honeymoon phase right there. That, yeah, this is going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread. And all of a sudden, after you've done all your tasks or everything, or you're resting 6 months in, you start to realize that, hey, well, maybe there's got to be more to this. I mean, I've done everything I want. And then you get that sort of disenchantment one, as you mentioned, until you start to finally realize, and then you get that recuperation around the end. So yeah, this does look very much like what I would expect it to be going forward. And that's sort of the scenario that we wanted to start to present as to where we are in those 5 phases.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we'll go through them here one by one, but it follows this kind of pattern. This was the emotional roller coaster, the adjustment process for retirement. So the first phase with the study, because remember, they only looked at 5, they dropped out
Right.
the pre-planning, but that first phase, and this is the peak in that positive attitude toward retirement, that peak in that prior chart. It's the honeymoon phase. You retire, you've been looking forward to this. Maybe you had a countdown going into retirement, you're crossing the days off the calendar, and you get
Yeah,
there and it feels like a vacation, right? I'm sure you got a
that's
long
right.
list of things that you want to do and you just jump right in, right, Kevin?
Yes, I mean, that's exactly where it is. I mean, that anticipation, you've been working your life to get to this point, and as soon as you hit that retirement, everything's going to be wonderful and glorious. And for the first 6 months, we see that usually that is, because it still feels like an extended vacation. You're not really at that point where, okay, well, you've got your 6 months done and now I'm going to go back to work. There is no more work after this. That's sort of the honeymoon phase. I want to be able to do this. I can golf. I can do this. I can get the other things done. The honey-do list is all full and I'm done with that. And honeymoon phase is the best part of the entire retirement scenario to start with. After that, though, then we move into the second phase, don't we?
Yeah, the disenchantment. And again, there's no time period on these phases. Maybe it's a
No.
few weeks, maybe it's a few months. Everyone's going to have a different process, but just kind of the idea that we generally go through these adjustment periods. The disenchantment, well, that was the drop on the prior chart. That's where we
Yep.
saw the significant decline in the positive attitude toward retirement. And this one, the reality might set in. It's not permanent vacation. Maybe everyone's different. Maybe you're an executive and you define your life by all the responsibility you're taking on through work. And then suddenly in retirement, you don't have all those responsibilities and you might feel a little lost, maybe a little bored, looking for a sense of purpose, a sense of structure. That is quite common to go through all those feelings. And that's generally what happens in the disenchantment phase, of that reality of retirement starts to set in. Another one that we've seen commonly, perhaps you retire early and you think it's going to be phenomenal, but then you realize you're on the golf course by yourself because all your friends
Yep.
and family are still in the office because
That's
they didn't
right.
retire early with you. So it's that reality setting in, and maybe there's a bit of a letdown compared to your expectations. That's really what describes this disenchantment phase. But it doesn't last forever, right? Eventually,
No.
you start to get a bit of a rebound and you move into the next phase here, Kevin, the reorientation phase.
Yeah, that's exactly it. As you said, to mention, maybe I don't have all these things. I didn't really have those desired goals. I mean, retirement was going to come and I really didn't have a big plan. So I went into it and then the disenchantment ends. But now I've got to start to reorient. And that's the biggest factor. Okay, well, I don't have a job to go back to. Now, am I going to volunteer? Am I going to find something that I want to do, a hobby of some format that I'm really going to be interested in, and other odds and ends? And I start to try and figure out, okay, what kind of path do I want to take in retirement? I know that I don't have to do things on a structured basis before, but that's where I'm starting to go. I need to find some sort of that purpose. That's the biggest factor, is trying to find out what's my purpose going forward with my retirement. What do I want to do? Do I want to spend more time with my grandkids and things along those lines? These are all odds and ends. That's sort of the reorientation phase, leading us towards where we want to get sort of our goals for retirement as a whole.
Exactly. In this phase, and I remember the initial model by the sociologist Robert Atchley, it was that we find a new role in life. And that's really what we're discovering in this phase. What is that new purpose? What is that new role as we go through retirement? And it leads into the stability phase. We have different naming here. Atchley's model called this the retirement routine. The study we're going through by Reitz and Moutron, they call it stability, but the same idea. You found that new routine. You found that new structure. Kind of that new role in life, the new sense of purpose. And this might be the longest phase of retirement. Maybe you spend the first 18 months adjusting and then you spend 10 years in the stability phase. That is certainly possible because this is when you really found that retirement routine and things have started to click. And we also see on the prior graph, remember it went up, that was the euphoric honeymoon, then it dropped and disenchantment started to turn the corner. That turning of the corner is the reorientation, then it comes back up. That's the stability phase, right? People are now getting more positive, more of a good experience in retirement. that's likely where you're going to spend the bulk of your time, is in this particular phase. Then the last one, which we already kind of joked about earlier, they call it phase 5. They call it termination, which is a little on the nose, but
could be a variety of different things. Going back to work, you could be put into a home. There's the other alternative beyond that. But yeah, I mean, that's sort of, you get to that point where everything seems to be at the end, and then, that's it. Retirement scenario's over, and we're on to the next phase of whatever's going on life-wise or elsewhere.
That's right. They do refer to it as termination of retirement. So maybe someone goes back to work full time. They're no longer adjusting to retirement because they're not in retirement. Perhaps they fall ill and they're in a care home, which is another phase of retirement. So it's not always death, but they do include it as the 5th phase in their particular study. So we are going to mention it as well. And then we'll go through quickly here a couple of findings that came from that REITs and Mutron study. I'll pull them up here. And these are quotes exactly from the paper. So it's their wording. But the first one here, self-esteem and friend identity meetings increase positive attitudes across all 3 benchmarks. So essentially, the more confident and higher esteem you were going into retirement, the more likely you would be open-minded to new experiences and to change. So you had higher positive attitudes across all the benchmarks. Doesn't mean you didn't go through that pattern where it drops and then picks back up, but your levels would be higher in all cases. And then also friends, right? If you're not just connected through work, but you have a lot of outside of work friends and you're willing to be a friend and have lots of social interactions, well, generally positive attitudes increased across all 3. And then a fun one there, Kevin, marriage didn't really help out.
Well, no, in the first 24 months, as it shows, I mean, being married didn't really be there. Now, it could be the fact that married couples, if there's age differences or something, are retiring at different time frames, and maybe you got used to things, having the wife come home after work, and you've been around for a while, been having time to golf all day and things along those lines. It's sort of after that 24-month period. Maybe both of you are retired at this point, and you're finally starting to get there. But yeah, marriage really didn't have a huge effect as to whether or not you were going to get that positive or negative sort of feeling overall. I mean, that's a huge factor going forward. And a lot of people think that, maybe that's a big one to look at.
Yeah, different adjustment if you're in a couple, really. And this study only looked at the first 2 years. So they make a note maybe as an effect down the road as people adjusted to their new routine. But in this particular study, not a big impact. Last 2 here quickly, the pension eligibility. This was a U.S. data, but I think it also apply to Canada. You're eligible for a pension. Understandably, with some more financial security, you have a bit of a guarantee there. Higher positive attitudes across the board. And then a surprising one at the end, poor health actually had a limited impact on positive attitudes in retirement. You might think if someone's in failing health or in poor health, well, emotional state will be worse, attitudes will be lower. That actually wasn't the case in this particular study.
So not at all.
A bit of good news there. It wasn't completely dependent on health of whether or not someone had a positive attitude throughout retirement. So quickly went through the 5 emotional phases there. Anything you wanted to add, Kevin?
Yeah, no, I mean, basically just remembering that this is a change in life, and humans in general are reluctant at times to have change. They get used to the routine. They've liked things the way they are. And that's why you sort of got that 24-month, or it may be shorter or maybe longer time frame to get used to it. But it is an emotional change that you have to get used to. And it is something to concern yourself with going forward into retirement. If you want to find any more on this topic or anything else, please consult us, chat with ClintonandKevin.com. We're more than happy to answer any of the questions that you have coming along on this topic or anything else in the financial industry. Please send us those messages or visit our website. Otherwise, that's another walk through the phases of retirement today.
Well, it'll be a wrap for this Financial 15. We'll be back again soon with another video. Take care.